Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, we're going to try an exercise. Now, I need some assistance here. We're going to do a cheer. Give me a C.
C.
Give me another C.
C.
Give me an M.
M.
What does that spell?
C-M.
And what does it mean? Continuous controls monitoring. That's right. Give yourselves a round of applause. You're all rock stars. Okay, let's talk briefly about what the agenda here. Key drivers for successful implementation for continuous assurance. The background that I'm speaking from is live experience over the course of years within my organization at Siemens Financial Services. We are financial services U.S. arm of Siemens AG. We are unlike most of what you end up hearing when Rod talks about Siemens, when they're talking about the industrial business of Siemens and procurement. We are dealing with financial services transactions, commercial finance, leases and loans. So a bit of a different business model. Technology tools we're going to talk about and why they're vital for success. I don't think I have to persuade anyone too challengingly on that. But then our challenge statement for our organization, what I was tasked to do within my organization. And then we're going to spend most of our time on the CCM implementation, what it was that we had done within our organization, and how that helps build the bridge to what I'm calling continuous assurance. Okay? I'm not saying necessarily monitoring, not saying necessarily auditing. It's assurance. And you'll see there's a hybrid there, which is the end goal. And then at the end, some conclusions and what our current day challenges are. Okay, key drivers for successful implementation. First of all, you want to define what are your objectives for auditing and monitoring on a continual or continuous basis. And you want to be able to have the support and commitment from your audit committees and your management. I think we heard some of these same concepts yesterday afternoon. James and Michael, as well as John recently this morning. And on top of which, continuous auditing really should complement your existing audit plan. And what I'm saying here is that you want to start building successes little by little, adding it to your existing audit plan. Consider getting the audit committee to approve the plan with obviously your periodic audits within your plan, but then adding in some of these continuous topics. And what I'd encourage you is to identify these key topics which are meaningful, but you know that you're going to be successful. Do not set up the target and then fail. Because if you fail, they're going to blame your methodology, and they're going to say continuous doesn't work, do the same thing you've been doing every year. So you need to be successful. So what better way is to automate and leverage from your well-defined periodic audits, which is some of the theme that we've been hearing. Stick with the topics that you know and mechanize them. Obviously, we want to migrate from testing of samples to testing of our universe. We want it to be a timely evaluation. We want to define the responsibility between continuous monitoring and continuous auditing. Now, I have a slide later on in the presentation, which I've been asked on numerous occasions to keep representing it because I've been told it's a good illustration of what the difference between continuous monitoring and continuous auditing and how it all works together. But ultimately, you want to be able to define what is going to be monitoring within your organization and what is going to be auditing when we're talking about a continuous methodology. Gain reliance by your external auditors and add value. We've heard that topic coming up a few times. For us, that's key. That's where we are really trying to drive the value. It's an external validation of your methodology and that your approach works, and there's a value perspective there. Because if you have your external auditors able to rely on your internal assurance process, whether it's audit or monitoring, that is key. reduce their hours, reduce their fixed fee. Okay, and formalize continuous audit approaches and methodology. Now, obviously, we want to embrace the technology tools that are going to enable us to be successful. Clearly, we've heard earlier this morning, data is key, okay? It's at the heart of continuous. Without the data analytic tools, I don't think we have any type of sustainable, continuous process that we could rely on. Now, I always hear people, years ago, they used to say, there's a continuous monitoring tool. There's a continuous monitoring tool for payables, for payroll, for travel and entertainment. Well, I don't think you have to use tools that say the word continuous in a name. You probably have tools that you're using today that will help you, cross that bridge to a continuous methodology. Why not consider using data analytics that you're currently using today on an ad hoc basis and start scheduling those routines on a repeatable, continual basis? So maybe you're doing an audit once a year. Maybe now you can do this once a month, maybe once a week, maybe daily. Where we're at right now is everything is daily for us. Now here was our challenge. My background, I'm 9 years at Siemens Financial Services. I was hired to start the internal audit department of Siemens Financial Services in the U.S. Started off as a small team of 3 individuals. Was there for 7 years, head of the audit function, and then corporate reorganized the audit function to make it more of a global top-down approach. When they did that, since our financial services business is much smaller than the industrial nature of the rest of Siemens, we start to see that the audit coverage for our organization was not going to have the same amount of coverage. However, our CFO knew that we needed to be monitoring and have the level of assurance over our business. So he entrusted in me to not go with the audit function with corporate, but rather to institute what we call a controls management function, which is basically a controls governance. We're monitoring. We're doing 404 testing. We're providing guidance to management, working and advising on controls. So one of my big missions the journey that we embarked on last year was to implement a CCM solution. And let's read this here. Implement the CCM program for the organization that offers flexibility in the definition of analytics, and it can be custom tailored to fit the needs with changing parameters of our business, which would also include a workflow approach, a workflow system whereby the owners of these analytics can update the status of their of their exceptions in a real-time basis with transparency across the organization. So we could see what's open and what's closed. As well as this whole program needed to be auditable because our key mission was to make sure that the corporate global internal audit function of Siemens, as well as our external auditors, would be able to rely on the results that we are providing with our continuous controls monitoring program. So what are we using for our solution? It's based in ACL, ACL Desktop, ACL Audit Exchange, and ACL AX Exception. I think everyone knows what the desktop tool is. That's been around for quite some time, quite powerful. Audit Exchange adds some additional functionality, additional collaboration. That's part of our mix. The last part is what I call that workflow solution for flowing the status of exceptions, working them through the process. They're assigned to owners, they're investigating them, and they're correcting and they're changing the status within the workflow, and it's completely transparent. So let's talk a little bit here about the implementation itself. And my goal here is, if I'm successful, you walk away at least with 3 important nuggets of information that will help every one of your approaches that you currently have or what you're looking to go to as far as a continuous solution, whether it's monitoring, whether it's auditing, or whether it's an integrated assurance approach. we built our program, what we call our engine. Our engine calls our analytics. Basically, that engine does your importing ODBC from all of our systems of records that are part of the analysis that we're performing across different systems in our organization. That after the importing, there's indexing, there's relations of the table, and there's extracting into what we call testing tables. Those testing tables are upon which we apply the analytics, okay? And then the results of that give you your exceptions. Now, this is an open framework. Why did we decide to use ACL for this? Because it was an open framework. This whole engine that I'm talking about is completely written in scripts within the tool itself. So we were able to prescribe how we want the mechanism of this engine to work every day. So this open framework allows us custom-defined engine and custom-defined analytics. So we're not locked into only doing our payroll monitoring or accounts payable, P2P. This is specific to how we wish to tailor our financial services analytics for our business. We don't have millions of transactions or hundreds of thousands of transactions every day. However, we do have hundreds of transactions a month, which could be $250,000 each, up to tens of millions of dollars each. So obviously, it's critical for our purposes. So let's talk about an exception versus an alert. Hint, one area I think hopefully you take away as a nugget here. What's an exception? An exception is something that is wrong. It's resulting from a broken process, a broken control, something that should not be. What do you need to do when something is broken? We need to fix it. So we either fix it by doing one of a few things. We go back and we correct the data. So now the data has been cleansed, let's say, repaired. But now we also want to take a look and say, is there a bigger picture why that's broken? What's the root cause of why this exception resulted? Maybe there's a process breakdown, a control that was not executed, that was designed, or maybe we find that there is no design of a control whatsoever. So the root cause of why you're getting those exceptions are key. But this bullet is actually saying, let's get more functionality out of our tool. We're not only looking for exceptions here. We're also looking for what we call alerts. We happen to call exceptions RX. We call alerts RAs. Bad joke is that RXs, you know why we call them RXs? Because the prescription for good controls is to remove these exceptions. So, but the alerts, what we're really trying to accomplish here is a twofold approach. Okay, dual purpose. We want to find the exceptions, but we don't want our tool and our methodology to only be viewed as a gotcha tool. We actually have the business coming to us, asking us to prescribe analytics to give them alerts. So let me give you an example. An exception for us, let's say, is that we have risk ratings, credit scores for our customers, and there's, let's say, a 1 to 10 ranking. And we want the customer score to make sure that it equals every one of those contracts for the customer. Why is that critical? Because reserves and provisions for bad debts are all based on that. Well, we want to make sure those scores are the same between the customer and their respective contracts within our system. If there's a mismatch, it's an exception. Now, we have the credit organization that says, you know, whenever there's an upgrade or a downgrade in the credit score, I'd like to know about it. Okay, good. That's an alert. Just because the credit score went up or down does not mean it's an exception. If the score doesn't equal from the customer to the contract, that is an exception. But the score going up or down is simply an alert. This is the value that we're also able to provide with the same tool, the same engine that's running every day. So think if there's an opportunity in your organization for that. We then have personalized email notifications that literally go to each of the owners individually for the analytics of which they are assigned as the owner. So they only need to be concerned, and it's all pushed directly from the engine because the engine goes and could send emails and send attachments with a summarized view of all the analytics and how many exceptions they had that day. Believe it or not, it even shows up on my BlackBerry there. So you actually can see everything because it just, pushes into your mail. So you could go call back to the office and make other people fix it, right? So script change management, logging, and email notifications. Well, this methodology is excellent as long as, A, we get the results, and B, we want to get the value and the reliance from others. And how do we make sure we're doing that? Is by satisfying the parties, the vested parties, whether they're internal audit, external audit, as to that we have controls over our program. Because we're seeing that our program is basically becoming an application control. This application control, so we have to have controls over user access, change management, our scripts, how it's controlled. Because we want our tool to be able to be relied upon. So once they get satisfied that the analytic criteria is correct, the financial team just verifies the analytic that it makes sense. Once the IT audit team verifies that the tool works, guess what? You rely on the control of our program. So how do we do that? Script change management. We need to show that we don't have unauthorized changes to our script, that we are, let's say, allowing some exceptions to go under the carpet and go undetected because we lighten the criteria when we want to just hide things. No. It has to be all controlled. So we actually built scripts in here in our tool that tell us every day, and it pushes out to my team, because we're all watching each other to make sure, safety in numbers, of course, is to make sure that whenever there's a new script, a changed script, or a deleted script, it's logged. And it's cumulative over time. So when someone wants to say, show me all the scripts that have changed, it's all here. We do the same thing with what we call master tables. Master tables are basically you making sure that you have all of the criteria that is supposed to be within the master tables of the system itself and look for any unauthorized changes. So something to think about there. Obviously, this process is all mechanized. There's no manual intervention here. This runs itself, right? It does all of the importing. It does all the data preparation. It does all of the testing. And then it gets to the very interesting stuff here. This last bullet on this page. It only publishes new or changed exception items. Now, what does that mean? We're doing this continuously, every business day. Well, as much as I'd like to say everybody fixes things quite timely, chances are they don't fix it on the first day. That exception still exists tomorrow. So because that is going to exist tomorrow, I don't want to republish the same item. So what do? We built a novel little approach within here with our scripts where we take the results for each analytic today, it compares to the results from yesterday, and then it pulls our database that has all that web-based back-end database that stores the status of all of the open and closed items, and it does a three-way compare. So what this is basically saying is, if this is a repeat item, don't publish it. Now what happens if the business says they fixed the item, I corrected it, these scores now agree, they close it in the tool? But ACL says this is still an exception. It finds it. It sees that they closed it, it republishes it to the website, and it also notifies us because maybe we need to have a discussion with somebody that they thought they fixed something, but it really wasn't fixed. So this is a good closed-loop process. What this is actually doing for us is providing self-validation of corrected exceptions and false positives. The significance here, and we're very excited about this because with the scripts that we've built, when someone closes an exception, we are positive the next day, if it does not republish on the website, we are sure that it's fixed. We don't have to go back and validate whether or not the condition was corrected, because if it wasn't, it's going to republish. But guess what? This is also a check and balance on our team that has oversight over the program, the programming. Someone says, I have a false positive. This isn't a real exception. Your criteria is too tight, and you're not allowing the flexibility. It's a false positive. They status it on the website. It sends us a notification for us to research the criteria, and then we can review it, and if we agree, we change that criteria. Now let's say that we close it, and only my team can close it as a false positive. Well, if we didn't fix that script, it's still going to show as an exception. And hence, what's going to happen is, now it's a check on us. It's going to republish that item. So we have a lot of checks and balances in here. We have reconciliations to make sure that day by day, all of the items that were found have made it to the website. We do roll forwards of the open, new items, less closed items from yesterday. That verifies that your outstanding items. I mean, what else would you expect from an auditor building a tool, right, with all of the controls within? Status updates. We push out status updates to the business so they know every 10 days how many open items there are. And here's a beauty, and I know Rod's going to want to talk about this later on the questions, is this CCM engine that we've built within Siemens Financial Services is completely portable to other parts of the Siemens organization. The only thing that they're going to do is they're going to write their own analytics, but they're going to use the engine and be able to use the methodology that we created. Or if they wish to add some functionality, they could certainly do that. It's completely open framework. And obviously, it's fully logged and auditable. Every single thing that's done in this program is tracked in a log. And that gives us the assurance with the external auditors. So let's very briefly here talk about this. Continuous risk assessment as part of a continuous methodology. We want to be able to identify the risk, the controls, and the impact, which will drive what are the topics that we are going to use within our tools to execute those continuous techniques. And none of this matters unless this bottom cloud happens. And that's the continuous corrective action. And the beauty of this continuous methodology is that when something is corrected, the new data that shows up tomorrow, if it's been fixed, you know that it's been evaluated for the effectiveness against the new data set, and it gives you that assurance. And this is a continuous process. So we should start to find if we need to add new techniques to our CCM program as part of our risk assessment. We build those techniques in the tool, and then the corrective action validation makes sure that that is happening. This is the slide I was talking about that people have asked me to present. It kind of is showing you the two different tiers here, continuous monitoring and continuous auditing. Continuous monitoring, in my definition, is simply a management function. It's owned by management. It may be preventative, detective, or corrective in nature. And continuous monitoring is a control in and of itself. Continuous auditing, on the other hand, is owned by the internal audit function. It's an audit activity. It's an audit responsibility. And audit should be independent of the control. We talked about the independence issue yesterday, and hence the one aspect that I would suggest watching out for the danger sign is I think audit can be somehow involved in the detective and the corrective, but I think audit wants to be careful about being classified as preventative. And that's where I would suggest that it's management that is on the preventative side. And if you're involved from the audit side, you could detect it. Now you give it to management to correct. So, the way to get efficiency here is really for audit to be able to evaluate the continuous monitoring activities of management. Because at the end of the day, if you could place reliance on management's, let's say, CCM tool, why does audit need to reproduce all of the same procedures if you could rely on that system, that program, just like we do for application controls? You want to rely on your IT general controls on that platform, and then you test your application controls. Same principle here. Hopefully, hybriding those together allows us to walk this bridge to continuous assurance by getting the sponsorship, the strategy, the partnership, and coordination across the organization, instituted with the right technology, integrated communication, and oversight allows you to build those two pillars to allow continuous monitoring and continuous auditing to drive you closer to continuous assurance. Now, we only have a few minutes left, but this is another very important slide that I hope that you could take something away with here. Continuous assurance attributes, whether you're auditing, whether you're monitoring, authorization concept. Making sure that transactions are approved according to authorization levels. Now, we may say, well, we got an application control for that. We don't need to test that on a daily basis. Well, wouldn't you want to make sure, when you look at the transaction data, that things were not approved in violation of what you thought you were relying on of that preventative control within your ERP system? What better way to resubstantiate that control is working? But we actually have some issues where the application control can't possibly check every authorization level. So hence there are manual controls. So either way, whether it's a manual control or an automated control, this is the authorization concept that you can build into your continuous mechanisms. The next box, data completeness. Data completeness is key. Or let's say someone mentioned they're in the insurance field. Are all of the elements to book a policy, are all of those populated in your insurance management system when you're booking a new policy? Table maintenance is another key area. Tables that hold rates, that enable you to make financial calculations. I told you we have our risk ratings. They're assigned percentages to help us determine what our reserve percentages are going to be against our accounts receivable for bad debt allowance. Well, if there's unauthorized access to those rates, we've got a significant problem in our financial reporting. What better way than for us to pull that table down from the system every day, and instead of doing the transactional analysis on it, we're doing master table continuous monitoring of it and compare it from day to day for changes. What does that do when you see a change? A change either says it was authorized or it is not authorized. And if it's not authorized, you know we have a change management issue. Edit checks, making sure that all of the criteria is correct in the system. Calculation verification, reperformance of revenue recognition, allowances, depreciation, you name it, making sure that the application, your host systems, are getting the right result. And believe it or not, if you perform those calculations, I assure you, you're going to find something. You may not find that the math is wrong. You may find that some of the attributes that are being used to develop that are not well controlled. We've found it in the past before some years back. So all of this helps get you closer to the foundations over change management and trending and analysis. Most of what I'm talking about here is the basics. I'm not even talking about heuristics and predictive analysis, which all of this built over time is going to help you get to. So overall, I think we want the right mix of preventative, detective, and corrective controls within our continuous monitoring and auditing, which is going to drive us to continuous assurance. And I'm just going to close with this one slide. So we do have in our environment running since February 45 analytics, of which is running on a daily basis. And our tool was used for a high-profile project that we had going on within our organization that satisfied the auditors that we successfully remediated the process and controls by simply looking at 20 of the analytics that we had running, and that made everybody very comfortable. So this is a testimony to being able to use this approach. And we rolled this out across the business. Now, here's the word of caution here. We're so popular now that we have requests for so many analytics that we don't have enough resources to build the analytics. So we have to figure out how we meet the demand. We have to prioritize based on a risk level and what the value proposition is to be able to build additional analytics. We need to develop our policy and procedure manual because when they want to audit our program, we need to have it documented. And here's the opportunity. Replace manual controls as well as manual SOX testing with your CCM program. And that's what our mission is for this fiscal year. And hopefully you could achieve your auditor reliance on your CCM program. So I know we're about out of time, but I do have other materials if someone wants to see me during lunch offline. So obviously, I'm just a little bit excited about this topic area. I know you all are also. So do we have a minute or two for any questions? Or